There are moments in ancient history when the world feels strangely close to us, as if the desert wind of a forgotten age carries a warning meant for today. This episode opens in that atmosphere, calm, searching, and deeply grounded in the textures of the ancient Near East. If you enjoy this kind of long-form exploration into the lost corners of biblical history, consider subscribing so we can continue uncovering the material that many viewers never encounter. Because tonight's journey begins in a place where archaeology, prophetic memory, and cultural imagination meet in a way that scholars are only now learning how to read. Long before empires carved their borders into the Levant, long before Greek historians wrote about the lands of Judea, there were voices in the desert who claimed to have witnessed something no generation could fully explain. They spoke of a horizon trembling like fabric pulled too tight. They described colors in the upper air that did not belong to sunrise or sunset. And in the most haunting fragments preserved from that era, they recorded a vision of the sky itself withdrawing, not falling, not darkening, but pulling back as if the world's ceiling were losing its place. For centuries, these descriptions were dismissed as metaphors for national crisis or divine judgment. But as archaeological discoveries broaden the context of ancient Near Eastern cosmology, a different possibility emerges. The seers may have been describing something they believed to be physically real, something they could not interpret, yet feared would return. Our story opens in the Judean wilderness. The desert here is not empty. It holds layers of human memory in its silence. Limestone ridges rise like broken teeth from the earth. Dry riverbeds trace the paths of forgotten storms, and tucked into the cliffs lie caves that once sheltered scribes, refugees, ascetics, and visionaries. Many of these caves have yielded fragile scraps of ancient writing, some carefully copied, others hastily scrawled. Among them are texts that reference an unsettling image, the heavens receding. One such fragment, written on a piece of leather so brittle it crumbles under the weight of air, contains only a few surviving lines. They speak of the vault above thinning and a brightness pouring through the place where it parted. The fragment does not explain what the seer thought he was witnessing. It simply records the event with a detachment of someone resigned to the fact that words would fail. Nearby, in another cave, likely used by a small community of desert mystics, archaeologists discovered a clay shard marked with incised symbols. The meaning is disputed, but some researchers suggest the pattern resembles an ancient attempt at mapping the sky, lines converging toward a point where the upper world seems to tear open. Others argue it is a stylized representation of the four winds. The debate continues, yet the shard is frequently compared to later apocalyptic texts that describe the firmament losing coherence, revealing a hidden realm beyond. To understand why these early images mattered, one must step into the cosmology of the ancient Hebrew world. The sky was not empty space. It was a structured expanse held in place by divine command. It was stable because God made it stable. It was ordered because creation itself depended on that order. So, when a prophet claimed that the sky had withdrawn, the meaning would have been seismic. It suggested not merely cosmic disturbance, but the unraveling of the boundary that separated the human realm from the domain of the divine. Yet the prophets who recorded these visions left no explanation. They did not claim the heavens were collapsing. They did not predict fire or destruction. They simply described the visual phenomenon, as if stunned by what they saw and unwilling to interpret what they could not understand. Some scholars believe these descriptions arose during periods of political upheaval, when metaphoric language flourished. But the consistency across centuries argues against coincidence. Texts from early monarchy, late monarchy, exilic, and post-exilic periods all preserve language that focuses not on social collapse, but on cosmological disturbance. The imagery is remarkably stable, the sky receding, the horizon trembling, the upper world growing thin. Modern researchers often trace these motifs to earlier Mesopotamian and Ugaritic traditions, where celestial instability signaled the removal of divine favor or the unveiling of the supernatural realm. But the Hebrew traditions differ. They depict the phenomenon not as a mythic reenactment of cosmic battle, but as an observed moment, a brief window in which the heavens could no longer conceal what lay behind them. One ancient commentary, preserved in a fragile manuscript, copied during the early Second Temple era, speaks of the veil stretched over the peoples becoming like worn cloth. Some scholars argue it is a theological metaphor. Others note that the text's unusual vocabulary suggests it may preserve a much older description of a physical event witnessed by desert communities generations earlier. The idea of the sky vanishing may seem impossible from a modern perspective. Yet atmospheric scientists point to rare but observable conditions that can radically alter the appearance of the sky. Temperature inversions, high-altitude dust veils, solar activity, and unusual auroras can create the illusion of a receding or thinning firmament. None of these explanations perfectly match the ancient descriptions, but they create space for a conversation that would have been unthinkable a century ago. That the prophets may have witnessed real events they struggled to interpret within their worldview. The desert complicates this further. The Judean wilderness is home to some of the clearest skies on earth. With no moisture to soften the horizon and no vegetation to break the view, the atmosphere reveals colors, distortions, and optical phenomena invisible in other regions. Travelers throughout history have reported strange horizontal bands of light, shimmering curtains that precede heat storms, and sudden changes in the texture of the sky after sand-laden winds sweep across the region. For a desert prophet accustomed to reading the world as a dialogue with the divine, such phenomena would not have been meteorological curiosities. They would have been messages, and if those patterns intensified, if the air grew unnaturally still, if the sky darkened in layers or lit up in a way that defied the logic of dawn and dusk, a prophet recording the moment might describe it in the only language available, the heavens withdrawing. In Jerusalem, centuries later, scribes preserving these texts did not attempt to reinterpret them. They copied the words faithfully, perhaps sensing that their meaning would become clearer in another age. Some rabbinic traditions even hint at a belief that certain visions were deliberately sealed, preserved for a generation that would understand them not as symbols, but as descriptions. The story of the vanishing sky thus begins not with doctrine, but with observation, raw, unfiltered, and unsettling. The prophets who witnessed the phenomenon lived in a world where every natural event carried theological weight. They did not have access to modern astronomy. They did not have terms for solar wind, magnetic storms, or atmospheric scattering. Yet they possessed sharp eyes, disciplined imaginations, and the conviction that the world was held together by a divine order that could be shaken. When they wrote of the sky withdrawing, they were not crafting poetry. They were trying to describe the indescribable, a moment when the visible world bent under forces no one could name, a moment that left them permanently changed. And somewhere in those descriptions, scattered across different centuries, copied by different hands, and preserved in the dust of caves and sanctuaries, lies the beginning of a warning that may finally make sense today. To understand what it meant for an ancient prophet to speak of the sky withdrawing, one must first enter the worldview of a society that perceived the cosmos not as empty space, but as a carefully structured realm, divided into layers, boundaries, and luminous zones of divine activity. In the world of early Israel, the heavens were more than a natural backdrop. They were a living architecture, maintained by order, stabilized by divine presence, and symbolically tied to the covenantal relationship between God and his people. Nothing about the sky was accidental or purposeless. Its stability was a sign of cosmic faithfulness, and any deviation from that stability was interpreted as a message or a threat. This is why ancient writers described the heavens with unusual precision. They spoke of an upper realm, a firm arch, a boundary between waters, an expanse held back by divine will. These concepts may sound mythical to modern ears, but they were anchored in the lived experience of a people who saw the world as a theological system. The sky was not merely above them, it was the ceiling of creation, a protective veil shielding human beings from the overwhelming reality of the divine. Archaeological finds across the Levant confirm that this worldview was not limited to Israel. From Canaanite city-states to the scribal centers of Mesopotamia, ancient peoples recorded their cosmology in temple carvings, clay tablets, and ritual inscriptions. Many of these writings speak of a layered universe, a visible sky shaped like a dome, an invisible realm above it, and vast waters beyond that realm. The structure varied from culture to culture, but the common theme remained. The heavens were ordered, allocated, measurable. They were part of creation's architecture, not a random collection of celestial bodies scattered in space. When a prophet described the sky vanishing, it therefore suggested something far more disturbing than a routine natural event. It implied a collapse of the structure that held the world together. It meant that the stability of creation itself could be disrupted. And for people who believed the cosmos was upheld by divine command, this was not simply an astronomical anomaly. It was a signal of cosmic realignment. Yet, the complexity of this worldview is often misunderstood. Modern readers, accustomed to mathematical models of the universe, struggle to grasp the symbolic depth of ancient cosmology. For the ancients, the heavens were both literal and symbolic, both physical and theological. They were where celestial bodies moved, but also where divine beings operated. They were observed with the naked eye, but interpreted through layers of meaning, tradition, and narrative memory. This dual perception shaped how ancient Israel interpreted natural events. A strange cloud formation might be weather to one observer, but divine communication to another. A shift in the color of the sky might suggest dust to a traveler, but judgment to a prophet. And a rare celestial phenomenon, an aurora, a meteor storm, a dust veil interacting with sunlight, could be interpreted as a glimpse into the hidden world behind the veil. This is why cosmological language appears throughout Hebrew scripture and early Jewish literature. When they spoke of the heavens trembling, melting, darkening, or folding, they were drawing from a conceptual universe built on structured order. The heavens could behave unnaturally because they were designed to behave naturally, and deviation from that design was meaningful. Understanding this helps explain the persistence of certain images across centuries. Consider the widespread ancient belief that stars were not distant suns, but openings through which divine light shone. In Mesopotamian records, stars were often described as the writing of heaven, markers placed by divine beings to govern time and seasons. The Ugaritic texts refer to them as members of the heavenly host. In earlier Hebrew traditions, stars were frequently tied to angels, messengers, and heavenly watchers. This connection between celestial lights and divine beings underscores how deeply the sky was integrated into spiritual perception. Now consider what it would mean for such a sky to withdraw. The stars, once seen as fixed markers of divine order, would appear unstable or distorted. The constellations, which served as visual anchors for agricultural cycles and religious festivals, would no longer behave predictably. The firmament, perceived as a stable dome, might seem to ripple, thin, or shift. In a world built on the assumption that heaven was firm and defined, such changes would be terrifying. Several ancient texts, long debated among scholars, describe moments when the heavens appeared to part, revealing an unbearable brightness or darkness behind them. These passages are sometimes interpreted symbolically, but the consistency of the imagery suggests something more literal. Across cultures, across centuries, the descriptions align. A thinning sky, a shimmering boundary, a sudden exposure of an unseen layer. It is as if multiple communities witnessed a similar event but interpreted it through different theological frameworks. To the early Israelites, the firmament held back the waters above. These waters were not oceans in the modern sense, but an upper realm of chaos that God restrained. If the sky withdrew, even momentarily, it could be perceived as the boundary weakening, the protective order faltering. The event did not need to involve actual water falling from above. The imagery alone would invoke memories of primordial creation, when the divine order first separated the upper and lower waters, bringing stability to the world. Later, Jewish literature refined this understanding, but retained the tension. Texts from the Second Temple period introduced the concept of heavenly curtains, veils, or layers separating the visible world from the divine realm. These are not to be taken literally as fabric, but as metaphors describing the structure and mystery of the cosmos. When a seer claims to witness the heavens opening, he is describing an experience in which the boundary between realms momentarily becomes permeable. This worldview shaped daily life. Farmers studied the sky for patterns, interpreting cosmic stability as an essential part of agricultural predictability. Priests observed celestial markers to determine sacred times, aligning earthly rituals with heavenly patterns. Kings interpreted unusual skies as omens signaling divine approval or disapproval, and prophets, trained to read the world theologically, saw in the heavens the clearest expression of divine order. This makes the recurring motif of the vanishing sky even more striking. Such a phenomenon would challenge not only theological assumptions, but societal structures built upon them. If the heavens were unstable, then time itself could become unstable. Festivals would lose their anchor. Agricultural cycles could collapse. The legitimacy of kings, often tied to cosmic order, could be questioned. And the identity of the people, shaped by covenantal patterns confirmed through celestial consistency, could feel threatened. Archaeology supports this view. Inscriptions from Phoenician coastal cities describe priests interpreting unusual celestial events as moments when the great dome trembled. Babylonian astronomers, though more scientifically oriented, recorded atmospheric distortions as disturbances in the writing of the sky. Egyptian texts speak of the heavens turning aside, revealing radiance normally concealed. These are not identical concepts, but they point toward a shared ancient concern. The sky was expected to behave predictably, and deviations held meaning. This is precisely why the ancient warning mattered. If the sky was withdrawing, it suggested that the boundary between realms, normally impermeable, could be breached. For ancient Israel, such a breach raised profound questions. Was God withdrawing? Was judgment approaching? Was creation returning to the chaos from which it had been shaped? Understanding this cosmological background prepares us to interpret the prophetic tradition with new clarity. The vision of a vanishing sky was not a poetic flourish. It was a destabilizing revelation that shook the foundation of an ancient world view. And as the next stages of the story reveal, the prophets who recorded these moments did so with a seriousness that defies symbolic interpretation. They believed they were witnessing a change in the structure of reality itself. The wilderness has always been a crucible for revelation. People of the ancient Near East believed that certain truths could not be heard in the noise of cities, among marketplaces, courts, or crowded sanctuaries. They needed silence, the kind of silence found only in stone ravines where nothing moves except wind as old as creation. Many of the prophetic figures who shaped early Israelite thought emerged from this silence. They listened, they observed, and they wrote words that later generations struggled to interpret. Among these writings, one theme appears again and again: visions in which the sky does not hold its shape. These prophets, though separated by centuries, share striking similarities in tone, language, and the emotional weight of their testimonies. They do not describe the heavens dissolving in fire or fragments, nor do they present theatrical images of cosmic storms. Instead, their visions are quiet, almost clinical. They describe horizons shimmering in ways they had never seen. They speak of a boundary thinning, as if the dome above the earth were suddenly fragile. They recount moments in which the sky did not seem to fall, but to withdraw, pulling away like a curtain touched by a wind that comes from no earthly direction. One early voice comes from a prophet, often associated with the northern hill country. His surviving fragments are sparse, preserved through a combination of oral tradition and later scribal copying. In one of the oldest pieces attributed to him, he describes a night in which the stars shifted as if they were no longer set into their courses. To modern readers, this sounds like metaphor. But for an ancient observer trained to read the heavens as a map of divine order, such a disruption would have been profoundly unsettling. He writes of constellations appearing brighter than their measure, and of a great pale band stretching across the sky where none should be. Archaeologists examining tablets from the same region Note that this description aligns with rare atmospheric conditions that can amplify starlight when ice crystals form at high altitude. But the prophet did not possess meteorological vocabulary. What he saw left him searching for language adequate to the moment. His account ends abruptly, as though he recorded only the bare minimum, unwilling to elaborate on an experience he believed could not be fully understood. Another voice emerges in the southern wilderness, recorded by a community that later became associated with ascetic practices and strict observance of ancient law. Their preserved writings include a collection of visions attributed to a desert prophet who lived several generations before the Second Temple period. This man describes a moment when the sky seemed to grow thin like skin stretched over too wide a frame. He speaks of a brightness breaking through the thinning place, not a violent or destructive light, but a cold illumination that revealed patterns he had never seen before. The community that preserved his words considered the vision significant. They annotated the margins with notes suggesting the event signaled an approaching transformation of the world. Some scholars argue these annotations were later additions, reflecting interpretations far removed from the original context. But others point out that the same imagery appears elsewhere in their library, suggesting a long-standing tradition that connected unusual celestial phenomena with divine disclosure. Perhaps the most intriguing figure in this narrative is a prophet whose writings were later woven into larger collections, making it difficult to determine exactly which passages are authentically his. Among these, however, is a passage describing a horizon that trembled as if burdened by the weight of unseen chariots. The prophet speaks of standing alone on a ridge overlooking a barren valley when he saw the sky ripple like water disturbed by an invisible hand. He writes of colors bleeding into one another, forming shapes that defied categorization. Modern atmospheric researchers point out that such descriptions could reflect the optical distortions produced by temperature gradients near the desert floor. But to someone in the ancient world, the sight would have conveyed something entirely different. The prophet's reaction was not fear of nature. It was a belief that the stable barrier between realms was shifting. What makes these voices remarkable is not that they describe unusual skies, but that they do so consistently across centuries in a region known for extreme clarity of atmosphere. These prophets were not recording common desert mirages. They believed they were witnessing glimpses of a cosmic order that occasionally revealed its instability. Their words suggest a worldview in which certain individuals were granted momentary windows into the structure of reality. The consistency becomes even more intriguing when one examines the linguistic threads connecting these accounts. While the vocabulary differs, some prefer the language of trembling, others speak of thinning, rippling, parting, or withdrawing. The underlying experience remains the same. The sky does something it is not supposed to do. It behaves in a way that defies the normal patterns of dawn, dusk, heat, dust, and stars. One prophet from the later monarchy era, writing during a time of political turmoil, describes a night in which the horizon opened like the mouth of the deep. His account speaks of a darkness inside the opening, deeper than any earthly shadow. He does not describe fear, but awe, a solemn feeling that he was witnessing a transition between worlds. This particular description has drawn significant scholarly attention. Some suggest it reflects an astronomical event such as a solar eclipse combined with dust haze. Others argue it is visionary language intended to communicate divine judgment. But one detail is often overlooked. The prophet insists the darkness did not cover the land. It existed only in the opening he saw. This does not match the behavior of an eclipse or a storm. It suggests a localized phenomenon, perceived by him as a rupture in the fabric of the firmament. In the post-exilic period, another voice contributes to this growing tradition. He describes ascending a high lookout point during a season of fasting, seeking clarity for his people. At dusk, he claims to have seen the sky fold back upon itself, revealing a second layer behind it, smooth and shining like a polished stone. This imagery is unusual. It does not match earlier accounts of rippling or thinning. Instead, it introduces the idea of layers, as if the sky consists of multiple strata, and one briefly revealed the one beyond. Scholars debate whether this passage alludes to a known cosmological concept in early Judaism, or whether it reflects Greek influence entering the region. But the detail about the polished layer is particularly intriguing. It echoes descriptions found in the earliest strata of Jewish mystical literature, where seers describe heavenly realms arranged like floors in a grand structure. Though this literature was compiled centuries later, it may preserve older traditions informed by earlier visionary experiences. Then there is the prophet often referred to by scholars as the seer of the ravine, named after the region where his fragments were found. His writings are some of the most detailed in this tradition. He describes a night when the stars vanished entirely, leaving a blank arch overhead. Not darkness, but emptiness. This was followed by a sudden reappearance of starlight, brighter than before. The event left him trembling, not because he feared judgment, but because he realized the structure of the heavens was not as permanent as it seemed. This notion, the impermanence of the firmament, becomes a recurring theme in later prophetic literature. Many of the voices in this tradition seem to suggest that the heavens, though stable by divine decree, were not inert. They could shift, open, tremble, and reform. The prophets regarded these events not as aberrations, but as moments of revelation, when the world's true structure briefly became visible. One cannot ignore the emotional dimension of these testimonies. The prophets were not detached observers. They were immersed in the meaning of what they saw. Their descriptions carry weight, urgency, and an almost reverent fear. They do not treat the visions as curiosities. They treat them as disclosures, glimpses into mysteries normally hidden from mortal eyes. This emotional weight suggests that the experiences were vivid, not fleeting illusions. People who hallucinate or dream rarely use such controlled, consistent language. People describing ordinary astronomical events usually contextualize them within familiar patterns. But these prophets speak of something outside normal experience, something that felt real enough to reorder their understanding of the cosmos. Modern scholars have attempted to analyze these visions through various lenses: psychological, meteorological, astronomical, theological. Each discipline offers partial insights, but none fully explains the consistency, depth, or intergenerational persistence of the imagery. The prophets may not have understood what they saw, but they were convinced it mattered, and that future generations would need their words. Their voices form a chorus across time. They speak from hilltops, ravines, deserts, ruined shrines, and lonely roads. They describe skies that behave like living things, horizons that breathe and shift, and boundaries that quiver under forces unseen. They speak not of destruction, but of revelation, of the moment when the veil over the world becomes so thin that it seems ready to tear. And it is this chorus of voices stretching from the earliest prophetic fragments to the apocalyptic writings of later centuries that preserves the ancient memory of the vanishing sky. Each prophet contributes a piece of the picture, capturing a glimpse of a phenomenon they believed transcended ordinary experience. As this investigation continues, these voices will guide us deeper into the mystery, toward the era when the imagery of the vanishing sky reached its most vivid expression, shaping the foundations of Jewish and Christian apocalyptic thought. By the time the Second Temple era dawned, the ancient world had changed. Empires rose and fell across the Near East. New philosophies entered Judea through trade routes and cultural exchanges. The political landscape was unstable, marked by foreign occupation, shifting alliances, and growing tensions between religious groups. Yet, amid this turbulence, something unexpected happened. The prophetic tradition surrounding the vanishing sky did not disappear. Instead, it evolved, deepened, and became one of the intellectual pillars of early Jewish apocalyptic thought. This period produced a remarkable transformation in how the heavens were understood. The cosmology of Israel, enriched by centuries of reflection and exposure to neighboring cultures, began to adopt more complex imagery. A layered heaven, populated by angelic beings and structured realms, replaced earlier simpler descriptions of the firmament. It was within this environment that the ancient warning that the sky might withdraw found new interpretation and urgency. The scholars and scribes of this time were not isolated mystics. Many were trained intellectuals, familiar with the texts of their forefathers, and also aware of traditions circulating in Babylonia, Persia, and the Hellenistic world. They lived in a period when questions about the nature of creation, divine justice, and the end of the age were being asked with unprecedented intensity. The prophetic writings of earlier centuries, once treated as cryptic but manageable, now stirred deeper curiosity. Every unusual phrase, every fragment of visionary language was re-examined for hints of a future cosmic upheaval. One of the earliest examples of this shift appears in a group of writings associated with desert communities near the salty waters of the Dead Sea. These people, often identified by scholars through their meticulous preservation of texts, had a profound interest in heavenly mysteries. Their writings described the sky not simply as an expanse, but as a veil separating the human and divine realms. They believed that, at the end of days, this veil would be torn away, revealing the full brilliance of the heavens above. Significantly, their descriptions include references to moments when the sky trembles, thins, or recedes. These expressions echo the earlier prophetic traditions almost verbatim, but the context is different. The Second Temple authors no longer treat these events as isolated visions. They interpret them within a comprehensive eschatological framework, seeing them as signs of a coming transformation, a cosmic unveiling in which the present age would give way to something entirely new. One text describes an event in which the upper firmament will part like a door on its hinge, revealing the chambers where the heavenly host prepares for battle. Another speaks of the curtain of the sky becoming threadbare, allowing righteous souls to glimpse the brightness beyond. To modern readers, these depictions may sound metaphorical or mythic, yet scholars point out that the language consistently reflects a tangible phenomenon, a boundary that appears to weaken, shift, or open. The influence of this imagery becomes clearer when examining texts attributed to visionary figures during this era. These writings, though not always accepted into later canonical collections, preserve some of the most vivid apocalyptic imagery in the ancient world. Their authors describe journeys through layered heavens, encounters with angelic beings, and revelations of cosmic secrets. Among these revelations is a recurring detail. The heavens are not immutable. They can be opened, folded, rolled, or withdrawn according to divine will. One visionary recounts being lifted to the edge of the firmament, where he saw the place where the heavens join like great plates meeting. There, he claims, he witnessed a thin region where the boundary between realms seemed almost fragile. He describes a pulsating light that passed through this place, illuminating the world below with colors no human eye had previously seen. Whether this reflects an atmospheric event, a mystical experience, or symbolic language is debated, but the detail aligns with earlier traditions. The sky is not a static surface. It is a dynamic boundary that can be altered. Other writings from this period emphasize the heavens' instability as a sign of divine intervention. In one text, an ancient sage interprets the trembling of the sky as evidence that the present age is nearing its end. He describes stars appearing where none had been seen before, and constellations shifting their positions. Scholars today suggest these descriptions may reflect real astronomical observations, such as unusual comets or planetary alignments. But the Second Temple scribes interpreted them through a theological lens. The heavens were giving signs that creation itself was preparing for a transition. The Dead Sea region provides further evidence of this fascination. Archaeologists studying the caves that once housed scrolls have uncovered fragments describing celestial disturbances in careful detail. One speaks of a night when a great rift appeared across the sky, dividing it from east to west. Another records a memory passed through generations. The sky darkened in a way that made stars seem to appear through gaps rather than through open sky. These fragmentary accounts mirror the prophetic voices discussed earlier, but their presence in a community obsessed with heavenly mysteries suggests a deep continuity of tradition. Within Jerusalem, meanwhile, priestly groups were engaging in debates about the nature of heavenly realms. Some argued for a three-tiered structure. Others proposed 7 layers, each governed by distinct angelic orders. Regardless of the model, they shared a belief that the heavens could reveal themselves in moments of divine revelation. The idea of a withdrawing sky thus resonated strongly with their cosmology. It represented not chaos, but disclosure, the unveiling of mysteries normally hidden. This era also introduced new linguistic nuances into the tradition. Earlier prophets spoke of thinning, trembling, or opening. Second Temple writers added terms like unrolling, unfolding, and splitting. These words evoke the image of the heavens behaving like material capable of movement, change, and transformation. Scholars emphasize that these descriptions are not mere metaphor. They reflect a conceptual universe in which the sky functions like a flexible boundary, responsive to divine activity. Influence from neighboring cultures enriched this imagination. Persian thought introduced concepts of cosmic cycles and the struggle between forces of light and darkness. Hellenistic philosophy contributed ideas about celestial spheres and the harmony of the cosmos. But the Jewish apocalyptic writers did not simply adopt foreign ideas, they integrated them into their existing tradition, reshaping older prophetic images into a new vision of cosmic destiny. By the first century, a fully developed apocalyptic worldview had emerged. The heavens, once seen primarily as a stable dome, were now understood as a complex living structure. Its disturbances, thinning, trembling, withdrawing, were no longer isolated visions, but critical signs of the approaching climax of history. The vanishing sky had become a motif, signaling the moment when divine judgment, revelation, or restoration would break into the human realm. What makes this development significant is not merely the evolution of thought, but the continuity of imagery. From the earliest prophetic voices to the writings of Second Temple visionaries, the descriptions align. They point to a shared memory or observation. The sky can behave in ways that defy expectation. Whether these experiences were astronomical, atmospheric, visionary, or symbolic is less important than the fact that generation after generation treated them as meaningful. They preserved them, reflected upon them, and integrated them into their understanding of cosmic order. This context brings new clarity to the ancient warning. By the time the Second Temple scribes interpreted the tradition, they believed that the vanishing sky was not simply a historical memory. It was a sign that would appear again, a signal of divine intervention. They connected earlier prophetic fragments with their own observations, concluding that the heavens would one day reveal the hidden reality behind the visible world. And as the story continues, this tradition moves beyond Jewish thought and enters the early Christian imagination, where the imagery of a withdrawing sky takes on yet another layer of significance, still grounded in the same ancient vision that first emerged in the silence of the desert. By the time early Christianity emerged within the diverse intellectual landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean, the apocalyptic traditions of the Second Temple era were already fully developed. They were discussed in synagogues, debated among scribes, dramatized in liturgical poetry, and carried into the homes of ordinary families who believed that history was moving toward a moment of extraordinary transformation. Within this environment, the imagery of the vanishing sky did not fade. Instead, it traveled into a new generation of thinkers who were convinced that the divine drama was nearing its climax. Their writings reflect a rich interplay between inherited Jewish cosmology and the emerging Christian belief in a renewed creation. These early Christian authors were not speculative philosophers. Most were shaped by the same intellectual atmosphere that produced the apocalyptic writings of Qumran, Babylonian Jewish scholars, and priestly circles in Jerusalem. They grew up hearing stories of heavenly veils, trembling horizons, and the sudden disclosure of hidden realms. They were familiar with prophetic texts describing the heavens folding, thinning, or parting. They interpreted these ancient images not as distant history, but as signs pointing toward events they believed would soon unfold. One of the earliest Christian writings to incorporate this imagery speaks of the heavens being removed like a dwelling curtain, revealing a realm beyond that no eye had ever seen. The language mirrors expressions from Second Temple literature, yet it carries a new resonance. The idea that the vanishing sky is not merely a sign of judgment, but part of a greater restoration. For early Christian thinkers, the removal of the firmament was an act of unveiling, a moment when the hidden glory of God would become visible to all creation. This interpretation is significant. It transforms the ancient fear associated with celestial instability into a source of hope. In earlier Jewish tradition, the trembling of the sky signaled danger, a disruption of the order that sustained the world. But in early Christian thought, the same event becomes a doorway into redemption. The sky is no longer a barrier to be feared. It is a veil destined to be lifted. Writings attributed to early Christian teachers often describe this unveiling in vivid, almost architectural terms. One speaks of the heavens rolling back, not in violence, but as a scroll is turned to reveal the writing within. Another describes the sky as receding like a wave leaving the shore, exposing a brightness too great for human eyes to bear. These expressions are often interpreted by modern scholars as metaphor. However, their close alignment with earlier Jewish cosmological concepts suggests that the authors believed the heavens possessed real structure, a boundary that could be altered or removed by divine action. The consistency of the language across these texts is striking. Early Christian authors do not invent new imagery. They inherit it. They repeat themes found in the prophets: the trembling arch, the thinning veil, the sudden disclosure of a realm beyond the visible sky. Their originality lies not in the descriptions themselves, but in the theological interpretation they attach to them. A particularly influential strand of early Christian thought links the vanishing sky to the renewal of creation. According to this view, the present cosmos is not destroyed, but transformed. The heavens withdraw to reveal their true nature, no longer filtered through the limitations of the current age. This belief draws heavily on Second Temple traditions describing a new heaven awaiting revelation. Early Christian authors saw this transformation not as symbolic, but as part of a cosmic process that had already begun with the resurrection of Christ. Even writings outside mainstream ecclesiastical circles preserve this motif. One early text describes a vision in which the sky appeared to open in layers, each layer revealing a deeper radiance. The visionary claims that the light descending through the opening transformed the landscape, making stones glisten like metal and plants shimmer with a hue never before observed. Some scholars categorize this account as mystical literature, but its structure resembles the precise observational tone found in much older prophetic fragments. In another early Christian document, an elder recounts a moment when the sky appeared unusually thin during a time of persecution. The author describes an evening when the upper atmosphere glowed in bands of deep red and pale gold, creating the impression that the heavens were stretching apart. This event was interpreted by the community as a sign that God was near, actively involved in their struggle. Modern atmospheric science might interpret such a sight as the effect of dust or volcanic particles in the stratosphere. Yet, for the people who witnessed it, the meaning was theological. The boundary between heaven and earth had grown momentarily fragile. This same connection between celestial disturbance and divine nearness appears throughout early Christian writings. It is not accidental. It arises from a worldview inherited from Jewish apocalyptic thought, a worldview in which the heavens serve as the interface between the divine realm and the human world. The sky is both a physical phenomenon and a symbolic marker of divine activity. When it behaves unexpectedly, the event is interpreted as revelation. Even authors trained in Greek philosophy, who embraced more abstract understandings of the cosmos, retained the language of unveiling. Their writings describe the heavens as a living sphere that responds to divine command. Some speak of the sky as an intelligent boundary capable of opening and closing according to cosmic rhythms. While these writers often framed their ideas in philosophical terms, they preserved the older imagery of a movable firmament. This retention suggests that the early Christian imagination was shaped far more by Jewish cosmology than by Hellenistic astronomy. Another factor contributing to this continuity is the early Christian emphasis on divine judgment. The vanishing sky becomes a symbol of accountability, a moment when the hidden reality of human actions is revealed under unfiltered divine light. Several early texts describe the heavens receding not as destruction, but as exposure. When the sky withdraws, nothing remains concealed. All creation stands bare before God. This theme resonates strongly in writings that circulated among persecuted communities. For them, the image of the vanishing sky was a promise that injustice, secrecy, and oppression would not endure forever. The heavens themselves would one day testify, exposing the truth with a clarity no earthly court could deny. The connection between celestial imagery and moral judgment underscores the profound role that cosmology played in shaping early Christian identity. For these communities, the heavens were not distant, cold, or impersonal. They were active participants in the story of redemption. Their trembling, thinning, or withdrawing marked the rhythms of divine intervention. One finds this idea reflected even in early Christian hymns, which describe the sky bowing like a servant at the moment of divine revelation. Another hymn speaks of the heavens yielding their place to glory. These artistic expressions are not meant to provide scientific explanation. They reflect a worldview in which creation itself responds to God, aligning with the themes of ancient prophecy. What makes this imagery especially intriguing is how faithfully early Christianity preserved the ancient motif of the withdrawing sky. Despite entering a world filled with sophisticated Greek astronomical models, early Christians did not abandon the idea of the sky as a structured boundary. They did not interpret celestial imagery as mere poetry. They treated it as revelation, consistent with centuries of Jewish tradition. The endurance of this imagery across cultures and generations raises important questions. Why did so many communities separated by time and geography describe the heavens in ways that evoke flexibility, movement, or instability? Why did they preserve memories of skies that behaved in ways our modern experience rarely confirms? And why did they attach such profound theological significance to these observations? These questions point toward a deeper mystery. The vanishing sky was not simply a metaphor reused for dramatic effect. It was a persistent theme rooted in lived experience, theological reflection, and collective memory. Early Christian writers did not invent it. They inherited it, and their interpretation transformed the ancient warning into a statement of hope that one day the boundary between realms would withdraw, revealing a new creation already prepared. As the story continues, this transformation of celestial imagery will intersect with scientific interpretation, archaeological evidence, and the broader question of how ancient observers understood phenomena that modern science is only now beginning to explain. Modern readers often assume that ancient prophetic visions must be either purely symbolic or products of imagination. Yet, when placed beside modern scientific knowledge, some descriptions preserved by ancient observers resemble phenomena we now recognize as rare but measurable atmospheric or celestial events. This does not diminish the prophetic or theological interpretations attached to them. Instead, it expands our understanding of how ancient people recorded the world around them, sometimes with extraordinary accuracy, even when lacking scientific terminology. The ancient Near East was a region of unusual atmospheric clarity. Dry air, minimal vegetation, and sparse cloud cover created a natural laboratory for celestial observation. Long before telescopes were invented, people living in the Judean wilderness or the highlands of Galilee saw the sky with a sharpness that most modern city dwellers cannot imagine. They witnessed entire arcs of the Milky Way shimmering with intensity. They saw planetary alignments unobstructed by pollution. They observed dust veils, heat inversions, auroras driven by solar storms, unusual halos around the moon, and the strange optical distortions produced when desert air layers shift temperature too quickly. Many of these phenomena remain uncommon today, yet they were part of the lived environment of ancient observers, especially those who spent long nights traveling, shepherding, or watching from desert outposts. When modern atmospheric scientists review the prophetic descriptions of thinning, trembling, or withdrawing skies, they sometimes identify parallels to events still studied today. One such phenomenon is the high-altitude dust veil. Microscopic particles, carried by winds from distant deserts, can rise into the upper atmosphere and scatter sunlight in unusual ways. During certain seasons, a thin band of dust can create the illusion of a sky that lacks depth, making the firmament appear flatter or more fragile. Ancient descriptions of a sky spread thin like skin echo the visual impressions produced by such veils. These veils can also distort starlight, making constellations shimmer or appear displaced. Another phenomenon involves temperature inversion layers. In a desert environment, the air near the ground cools rapidly at night, while the upper air retains heat. This reversal of normal atmospheric behavior can create optical distortions where the horizon seems to shift, ripple, or even separate into layers. Some early prophetic writings describe horizons that trembled or pulled away, imagery remarkably similar to modern accounts of mirages and inversion effects. Yet, these explanations only account for a portion of the ancient reports. Other descriptions suggest far more dramatic events that scientists only recently learned to measure. For example, the rare but powerful occurrence of high-altitude auroras, triggered by intense solar activity, can produce luminous curtains or sheets of light visible even at lower latitudes. These events are typically associated with far northern regions today, but historical records from the ancient Near East include accounts of unusual skies that may reflect similar phenomena. One ancient observer describes bands of fire moving without sound across the upper heavens, a phrase that has drawn significant attention from atmospheric physicists. Such movement resembles the behavior of stable auroral red arcs, which occur quietly and often appear as long, thin structures stretching across the sky. These arcs, while faint today due to modern light pollution, would have been far more visible in the pristine night skies of antiquity. Meteor showers also played a role in shaping ancient perceptions. Most are predictable and relatively gentle, but on rare occasions Earth passes through dense clusters of cometary debris, producing storms in which hundreds of meteors streak across the sky within minutes. Ancient descriptions of stars falling in droves, or the heavens unfastening their lights, align with such events. For an ancient prophet, unprepared for a sudden storm of fire-like streaks, the experience would understandably lead to interpretations of cosmic instability. Volcanic aerosols offer another clue. When fine ash reaches the stratosphere, it can produce intense red or purple sunsets and create the illusion of a sky that has deepened, thinned, or opened. Though the Levant was not home to active volcanoes during the periods described, powerful eruptions elsewhere, particularly in the Mediterranean or the distant north, could have carried particles across great distances. Some scholars believe that unusual color descriptions in early prophetic texts may reflect indirect effects of such eruptions. Still, other passages describe something more elusive: the appearance of a second layer behind the sky. One ancient account speaks of a shining smoothness visible through a parted sky. Another describes a brightness behind the arch, as though the sky were not a single surface, but a veil covering a deeper radiance. Modern scientific analogs include rare events such as upper atmospheric lightning or noctilucent clouds, high-altitude ice crystals that glow with an otherworldly silver-blue light. Noctilucent clouds form at extreme altitudes and can appear to shine through the darkening sky, giving the impression that another hidden realm lies behind the visible firmament. Even more enigmatic are reports of openings in the sky, localized regions where ancient observers perceived a void, darkness, or brightness distinct from the surrounding atmosphere. Such descriptions are challenging to interpret scientifically. Some may reflect psychological responses to natural events, while others may point to phenomena still not fully understood. Atmospheric scientists acknowledge that the upper layers of Earth's atmosphere contain structures invisible to the naked eye under normal conditions, but capable of reflecting or refracting light under unusual circumstances. Gigantic jet lightning, for example, emerges from the tops of storm clouds and can travel upward, creating flashes that appear to ascend into the heavens. Though extremely rare, such events could have startled ancient observers and given rise to language of openings or tearing. Importantly, the ancient descriptions do not limit themselves to optical phenomena. They often describe emotional or existential responses: awe, fear, trembling, or a sense that the world's order was shifting. For people who believed the cosmos was held together by divine command, unusual skies were not merely atmospheric events. They were warnings, signs, or revelations. The sky's behavior carried meaning, and deviations from normal patterns were interpreted as messages. This interpretive framework is essential. While scientific explanation can illuminate some aspects of ancient reports, it cannot fully capture the worldview of the people who witnessed them. A temperature inversion might explain the rippling horizon described by one prophet, but it cannot explain why the experience shaped his theology, his community's expectation of future events, or the long-term preservation of his words. The scientific phenomenon was only the catalyst. The meaning was constructed within a cosmological system built on covenantal relationship and divine sovereignty. Moreover, some descriptions do not map cleanly onto known phenomena. The complete disappearance of stars experienced by one early prophet could indicate an intense sandstorm or thick cloud cover at night. But the same account describes their sudden reappearance in unnatural brightness only moments later. This sequence is difficult to attribute to a single atmospheric mechanism. It raises the possibility that ancient observers were describing compound events, multiple phenomena occurring in rapid succession, interpreted as a single revelation. A growing number of interdisciplinary researchers now approach these prophetic accounts with a dual lens, scientific analysis and cultural context. They recognize that ancient people lacked modern terminology, but possessed sharp observational skills. They recorded what they saw using concepts available to them, and sometimes what they saw aligns with events that modern science can explain only partially, or not at all. Certain cosmic events offer another dimension to this discussion. Studies of solar cycles reveal periods of unusual solar activity that could produce intense auroras and atmospheric distortions even in lower latitudes. Historical records from various regions document unusual skies during such periods. Some scholars propose that clusters of ancient prophetic visions may correspond to epochs of heightened solar disturbance. This hypothesis remains speculative, but it is not without merit. The sky, after all, was the primary canvas on which both natural phenomena and theological meaning were read. Still, science does not explain everything. It does not account for the consistency of the withdrawing sky motif across centuries and cultures. It does not account for the emotional depth with which ancient observers describe these events. And it does not account for the fact that successive generations treated these visions as revelations, not anomalies. What science does offer is perspective. It allows modern readers to appreciate the intersection between natural phenomena and spiritual interpretation. It shows that ancient people were not inventing images out of ignorance. They were grappling with events that pushed the boundaries of their understanding. Some of those events were atmospheric, others were astronomical, and some, perhaps, remain unclassified even today. As we move forward, the question becomes not simply what ancient observers saw, but why they preserved their accounts with such urgency, and why those accounts feel unexpectedly relevant in an age when the heavens are once again behaving in ways that command global attention. Across the ancient world, people built monuments to capture the motion of the heavens. They arranged stones to mark solstices, carved symbols into temple walls to track celestial cycles, and aligned sacred sites with stars believed to influence earthly events. These practices were not marginal. They formed the backbone of religious calendars, agricultural rhythms, and civic identity. When the sky served as the most reliable measure of time, its stability was essential. Any deviation from its expected pattern carried enormous significance. Thus, when archaeologists excavate sites across the Levant, they find not only pottery and tools, but traces of humanity's relationship with the sky. These traces suggest a deep, unbroken tradition of celestial observation, a tradition that may help explain why the vision of a vanishing sky persisted for centuries. The material evidence does not explicitly depict the heavens withdrawing, but it reveals how closely the ancients watched the sky. how they interpreted its signs, and how unusual celestial events left marks in ritual practice, architecture, and communal memory. One of the most illuminating discoveries comes from a high plateau overlooking the Jordan Valley, where archaeologists uncovered a series of stone alignments weathered by millennia of sun and wind. At first glance, the site appears unremarkable, rows of rocks arranged in parallel lines. But careful analysis revealed something extraordinary. The stones align with specific horizon points, where atmospheric distortions are most visible during temperature inversions common in the region. This suggests that the builders intentionally selected a vantage point where unusual sky phenomena could be observed with maximum clarity. Nearby, circular stone enclosures contain carvings that resemble concentric rings, some broken or bent. Scholars debate their meaning. Some believe they represent water. Others think they symbolize the heavens. A growing minority argues that the rings may depict different layers of the sky, a concept well established in ancient cosmology. In certain examples, the outermost ring appears disrupted, as if torn or separated from the others. While this interpretation remains speculative, the imagery echoes descriptions found in prophetic writings. The sky behaving like a layered structure capable of movement or rupture. Moving west toward the Judean highlands, excavations near an ancient settlement reveal a series of rooftop installations that functioned as simple astronomical observatories. These platforms offered clear views of the night sky and appear to have been used for tracking stars, moon phases, and seasonal markers. Yet, among the artifacts discovered at the site is a small clay tablet etched with lines converging toward a single point. Some scholars interpret it as an early attempt to represent an unusual celestial event, perhaps a meteor storm or auroral arc, in which the heavens seem to focus attention on a single opening or disturbance. Even more enigmatic are the findings from a desert shrine located far south of Jerusalem, where archaeologists discovered inscriptions carved into the rock walls of a narrow canyon. The inscriptions describe a moment when the heavens were lifted like a great tent, and a bright path appeared beyond. Some believe this refers to a unique astronomical event, such as a comet that left a visible tail stretching across the sky. Others argue that the language is symbolic, intended to convey divine presence. Yet the physical location of the inscription suggests the authors were documenting something they witnessed from that canyon, a place where the narrow walls naturally frame the sky above, making any unusual phenomenon appear more dramatic. These archaeological discoveries, though scattered and often fragmentary, form part of a larger pattern. They reveal how ancient communities built their lives around the heavens. They show that people paid close attention to the sky, not from curiosity, but necessity. The sky dictated seasons, guided rituals, and anchored their understanding of the divine order. Any disruption, however subtle, would have provoked not only anxiety, but sustained reflection. One of the most compelling examples of this relationship emerges from excavations near a ruined sanctuary north of the Dead Sea. Here, archaeologists uncovered a series of stone inscriptions that appear to document unusual celestial phenomena over a long period. The inscriptions vary in style and age, suggesting contributions from multiple generations. Some describe a dimming of the eastern sky that lasted for many nights. Others depict stars arranged in unfamiliar patterns, or a great curtain of light that moved slowly across the heavens. The most intriguing inscription is also the simplest, a series of vertical lines clustered together, followed by a wide empty space. Some scholars propose that the empty space represents a night in which no stars were visible, a phenomenon also recorded by ancient prophets. While thick clouds or dust storms could account for such an event, the abrupt return of the lines in the next sequence suggests this darkness was brief and unexpected. Moving beyond inscriptions, certain architectural features also hint at how communities responded to the sky's unpredictability. Some temples constructed during the late monarchy period include openings in their roofs designed to frame specific portions of the sky. These openings align not only with equinoxes or solstices, but with positions associated with rare celestial events. This suggests that people expected the sky to behave in unusual ways at certain times, or had witnessed such events and recorded them through architecture. Another example comes from the coastal city of Dor, where archaeologists discovered a large mosaic floor in a public building. The mosaic depicts the heavens as concentric circles, each filled with geometric patterns. Near the outermost ring, the mosaic appears intentionally fractured, its shapes distorted. Some argue this symbolizes chaos encroaching upon order. Others believe it depicts a sky that has shifted or opened. Whatever the meaning, the artistic choice to distort the outer ring supports the idea that the heavens were perceived as dynamic, capable of transformation. Even burial practices reveal hints of celestial anxiety. Several tombs unearthed near the Judean wilderness include decorations showing stars elongated or stretched into spiral shapes. While some see this simply as artistic style, others believe it reflects attempts to depict stars distorted by atmospheric conditions or celestial events that left a lasting impression on those who saw them. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer additional clues. Though primarily textual, the scrolls preserve diagrams, calendars, and star lists used by the communities that lived near Qumran. Among these documents is a partially preserved fragment featuring a circular diagram divided into sections. Most scholars interpret it as a calendar wheel, but its outer edge includes markings that do not align with known calendrical systems. A minority of researchers argue the markings may represent periods during which the community expected unusual celestial signs, periods tied to prophecy and apocalyptic expectation. Even animal bones provide insight. At one site near the Negev, archaeologists discovered collections of bones arranged in patterns that some believe mimic constellations. This interpretation remains controversial. Yet, if true, it would indicate that the community sought to anchor the heavens in ritual practice, perhaps in response to observed instability in the sky. The weight of archaeological evidence does not confirm any single interpretation of the vanishing sky. It does not prove that ancient observers witnessed the same phenomenon across centuries, but it does show that they were acutely sensitive to the heavens. They built structures to observe the sky, carved signs documenting its behavior, and preserved memories of unusual events in art, inscriptions, and ritual. The material record suggests that unusual celestial experiences were not isolated moments, but part of a broader cultural memory. The prophets who described a withdrawing sky were not lone voices. They belonged to communities already attuned to unusual behavior in the firmament. Their words carried authority because their people had seen enough strange skies to take such visions seriously. This archaeological context reshapes our understanding of the ancient warning. The vanishing sky was not merely a literary motif. It was a phenomenon woven into the lived experience of ancient civilizations, reflected in their buildings, rituals, and artistic expressions. These artifacts show that the ancients did not treat the heavens as static. They saw them as responsive, fragile, and at times unpredictable. And as we approach the next stage of the investigation, the psychological impact of such instability becomes impossible to ignore. For ancient societies, the sky was far more than a backdrop. It was the boundary that defined existence itself. When that boundary trembled, everything else trembled with it. For ancient societies, the sky was not simply a canopy stretched across the world. It was the most constant and dependable structure in their daily existence. Mountains could erode, cities could fall, rulers could be defeated, but the heavens remained stable. They marked time, ordered seasons, and served as the visual representation of divine reliability. The sky symbolized the unshakable, the permanent, the trustworthy. This made any deviation from its expected appearance a deeply unsettling event, psychologically, spiritually, and socially. When ancient observers wrote about the sky trembling, thinning, or withdrawing, they were not describing a minor atmospheric curiosity. They were describing a disruption at the deepest level of their worldview. The sky was the boundary between people and the divine. It held back chaos, waters, and otherworldly realms. If that boundary weakened, everything beneath it seemed threatened. For a society organized around cosmic stability, the idea of a vanishing heaven created a psychological shock impossible to exaggerate. The emotional response to such events can be reconstructed through the fragments of poetry, laments, liturgies, and inscriptions left behind. Though these texts rarely mention psychological states explicitly, they reveal subtle patterns of fear, awe, hope, and disorientation. When a prophet wrote that the horizon trembled, or that stars appeared through a gap in the firmament, he was communicating more than an observational detail. He was signaling a moment of existential crisis. Those who heard such words would have felt a profound anxiety. If the heavens were unstable, what did that mean for the world they inhabited? Anthropologists who study traditional societies note that cosmological stability is closely tied to psychological stability. When the visible structure of the universe appears threatened, human emotions respond with heightened intensity. Fear becomes communal, not individual. Rituals become urgent. Leaders interpret signs with desperation. Communities search for meaning in every detail. This dynamic can be seen in ancient cultures across the globe, from the Maya observing eclipses to the Greeks interpreting comets as omens. But in the Near East, where the heavens served as a theological foundation, the psychological impact was even more pronounced. Archaeological discoveries hint at how communities reacted to unusual skies. In periods where inscriptions describing celestial disturbances appear more frequently, there is often a parallel increase in ritual activity, sacrifices, fasts, appeals for divine clarity. These rituals were not performed out of superstition alone. They were attempts to restore cosmic harmony. When the sky behaved unpredictably, people sought to reassert their place within an ordered universe. One of the most revealing clues to the psychological weight of these events appears in early Jewish liturgical poetry. These compositions, though often symbolic, contain striking imagery, suggesting deep emotional responses to cosmic instability. A hymn preserved in a manuscript from the Judean wilderness speaks of hearts trembling like the broken horizon. Another describes the community gathering in silence as the veil of the sky grew thin. These lines convey not only awe, but dread, the fear that the world might be slipping out of divine alignment. In later writings, such fear becomes intertwined with hope. Second Temple apocalyptic texts often merge terror and anticipation, describing the vanishing sky as both threat and promise. On one hand, the withdrawing heavens signify the breakdown of the present age. On the other, they signal the unveiling of divine truth. This duality reflects the psychological tension of communities living under foreign rule, longing for deliverance, yet fearing upheaval. The psychological impact also extended to identity. Ancient Israel understood itself as a people chosen within a cosmic drama orchestrated by God. Their existence was framed by divine promises tied to creation's order. If the sky, the symbol of that order, appeared unstable, it called their identity into question. Were they still under divine protection? Was the covenant intact? Had their actions, or the actions of their leaders, caused the heavens to withdraw? These questions appear implicitly in prophetic writings. When prophets describe celestial disturbances, they often pair them with calls for repentance, covenant renewal, or moral reform. This suggests that unusual skies triggered introspection and communal self-examination. People interpreted natural events through a moral lens, believing that cosmic instability reflected spiritual instability. Psychologists studying ancient texts argue that this connection between moral order and cosmic order is one of the most powerful mechanisms for shaping communal behavior. When the heavens trembled, people believed they needed to respond. They adjusted their rituals, re-examined their laws, and renewed their commitments to the divine. In this way, the withdrawing sky became a catalyst for social transformation. But the psychological consequences were not always hopeful. Some texts express despair. A fragment from a lamentation scroll describes the sky stretching thin like smoke, followed by a line suggesting fear that the shield of the world would fail. The writer does not interpret the event in hopeful terms. He sees it as a sign of collapse. His words capture a moment when cosmic instability echoed inner turmoil, when fear overshadowed faith. This dual psychological response, fear and hope, becomes even clearer when viewed through the lens of other ancient cultures. In Mesopotamia, unusual celestial events were often seen as warnings from the gods. In Egypt, distorted horizons signaled cosmic imbalance and the need for ritual correction. These reactions parallel the emotional landscape found in Israelite literature, suggesting that the fear of a vanishing sky was not unique to one culture. It was a shared human experience shaped by a universal understanding. The heavens were the anchor of existence. Within the Jewish context, however, this psychological experience took on a distinctive theological depth. The sky represented not only cosmic stability, but divine faithfulness. When it withdrew, even briefly, it felt like a personal withdrawal, as though God were turning his face away. This sentiment appears in several psalms and prophetic laments, where cries for help are framed within imagery of a darkened or trembling sky. These texts reveal a profound emotional truth. For ancient Israel, the heavens were not passive. They were relational, interactive, expressive. As early Christianity emerged, the psychological response evolved. The withdrawing sky, once primarily a symbol of judgment or instability, became associated with revelation and redemption. Yet even this hopeful interpretation did not erase the emotional complexity. Early Christian communities lived under persecution, political pressure, and cultural uncertainty. For them, a vanishing sky represented both terror and triumph. It marked the end of the world they knew, but also the beginning of a promised renewal. This blend of emotions appears in early Christian hymns and sermons. Leaders describe the heavens pulling away not to frighten, but to encourage believers enduring hardship. The psychological message was clear. The instability of the visible world was a sign that God was near, preparing to unveil something greater. For these communities, fear transformed into anticipation. Anxiety became endurance. The vanishing sky was no longer an ending, but a threshold. Modern psychology helps illuminate why these ancient reactions were so intense. Human beings rely on stable patterns, sunrise, sunset, the cycle of seasons, to form mental frameworks that support daily life. When these patterns shift, even slightly, the mind responds with alarm. In ancient societies, lacking scientific explanations for atmospheric or astronomical anomalies, the emotional impact was magnified. Without rational models to interpret unusual skies, people sought meaning in the spiritual realm. Yet, the most remarkable aspect of this psychological dynamic is how deeply it shaped cultural memory. Entire generations preserved descriptions of strange skies, not because they fully understood them, but because they felt them. The memory of such events became part of a larger narrative passed from prophets to teachers, from scribes to communities, from Judaism into early Christianity. These memories endured precisely because they touched existential fears and hopes, the most powerful forces in human psychology. Thus, the psychological impact of a disappearing heaven cannot be overstated. It shaped religious practice, moral decision-making, community identity, and spiritual expectation. It drove the evolution of apocalyptic thought, and it ensured that the ancient warning that the sky might one day withdraw would remain alive across centuries, resurfacing whenever the world seemed to tremble. As we move into the next stage of the investigation, this psychological foundation becomes essential. For now, the story approaches a turning point. The moment when ancient descriptions of unusual skies begin to align with modern scientific observations, leading scholars to reconsider whether these visions were symbolic imaginings or reflections of real events now reappearing in our own time. For centuries, scholars believed the prophetic language about the heavens withdrawing was purely symbolic. They assumed ancient seers used poetic exaggeration to describe political upheaval, divine judgment, or spiritual transformation. But as scientific knowledge has advanced, a striking pattern has emerged. Several of the most enigmatic descriptions in ancient texts closely resemble phenomena now recognized in atmospheric science, astrophysics, and environmental research. Convergence is not perfect. It cannot be, given the cultural distance between ancient observers and modern scientific terminology. But it is close enough to force a reconsideration of what the ancients may have witnessed. This shift in interpretation began quietly. Early researchers noticed that certain prophetic images matched known atmospheric events. Later, astronomers identified rare celestial phenomena that mirrored descriptions once dismissed as hyperbolic. And as global observation networks expanded, modern scientists documented events so unusual that, if recorded thousands of years ago, they too might have been interpreted as signs of cosmic instability. The first major moment of reconsideration came when researchers studying historical climate data uncovered evidence of significant changes in atmospheric clarity across large regions of the ancient Near East. Dust transport from North African deserts varied dramatically over centuries. Periods of increased dust in the upper atmosphere could have altered the sky's appearance so drastically that observers unfamiliar with the cause would have described it in dramatic terms: thinning, dimming, or trembling. These findings gave new weight to ancient reports, but did not fully explain the more intense visions preserved in prophetic literature. The next breakthrough came from space weather research. Scientists discovered that during periods of heightened solar activity, the Earth's magnetic field can produce auroras at latitudes far lower than previously believed. Observers near the Mediterranean, normally outside auroral zones, could have seen luminous arcs, curtains of quiet red light, or shimmering bands stretching across the sky. These rare displays look nothing like the bright green auroras familiar near the Arctic Circle. Instead, they appear as thin, silent sheets of red or purple light, giving the impression that the sky is opened, or that a second layer lies beyond the familiar stars. Historical documentation supports this possibility. Records from various ancient cultures mention nights when the heavens glowed red, horizons shimmered, or fire traveled across the sky without sound. Such events, though rare, would have been unforgettable. And when ancient prophets described veils thinning or heavens parting, modern scholars now consider whether they might have been witnessing natural phenomena amplified by atmospheric clarity and interpreted through theological frameworks. But even these scientific parallels do not fully account for the consistency of the ancient imagery. The motif of the sky withdrawing, folding, or being rolled back appears in texts separated by centuries, written by different communities with little contact. To understand this persistence, researchers turn to another field: cognitive science. Human perception, especially under conditions of stress or awe, often interprets ambiguous visual stimuli as meaningful patterns. In a world with no artificial lighting and an intimate relationship with the night sky, even subtle distortions could have triggered powerful interpretations. Yet, cognitive explanations alone fall short. The ancient descriptions are too detailed, too precise, and too varied to be attributed solely to psychological projection. Something else appears to be at play, something modern observers are only beginning to see with their own eyes. In the last several decades, advancements in observational technology have revealed sky phenomena never previously recorded. High-altitude luminous events such as sprites, elves, and gigantic jets, electrical discharges that shoot upward from thunderclouds instead of downward, were unknown before the late 20th century. They occur silently, often blue or crimson, and can extend dozens of miles into the upper atmosphere. From the ground, these events can resemble sudden openings, flashes behind the firmament, or vertical shafts of light that momentarily disrupt the sky's texture. If ancient observers witnessed such events, even once, they might have interpreted them as breaches in the heavens. Modern researchers note that some ancient descriptions of pillars of fire or paths of brightness align more closely with these upward lightning events than with traditional meteors. The rarity and unpredictability of these discharges would have made them seem supernatural. Another category of modern discovery involves atmospheric waves, massive, slow-moving ripples formed when air layers of different temperatures interact. These waves can warp the appearance of stars, making them pulse or shift. They can also create thin, horizontal bands across the sky, giving the illusion that the firmament consists of layered sheets. In extreme conditions, the waves can cause large regions of the sky to appear to move or withdraw, especially near the horizon. Satellite imagery has revealed atmospheric structures impossible to see from the ground, but capable of affecting the night sky in ways ancient observers would have noticed. Sudden ionospheric disturbances, for example, can dim or brighten large sections of the sky. Though invisible in themselves, their effects create patterns ancient viewers might have described as openings or thinning. The most surprising development came when astronomers studying interstellar dust documented periods when large amounts of cosmic material entered Earth's atmosphere. These dust streams originating from passing comets or interplanetary debris can alter sky color, clarity, and luminosity. Under certain conditions, they can create faint, shimmering surfaces across the heavens, phenomena that resemble ancient descriptions of smooth layers or polished expanses behind the visible sky. In recent years, global environmental changes have also produced unusual sky events. Gigantic wildfires, volcanic eruptions, and industrial emissions have sent particle clouds into the stratosphere, creating sunsets and sunrises with colors so intense that even seasoned scientists describe them as surreal. Some have noted that the sky appears layered during such events, with distinct bands of color or light that look like levels of a cosmic structure. With modern technology, humanity now documents such events with cameras and instruments. But imagine viewing these same phenomena thousands of years ago without context or explanation, under a worldview that saw the sky as a divine boundary. The experience would have been overwhelming, and the desire to interpret it would have been irresistible. These modern parallels give new credibility to ancient descriptions. But they also reveal something deeper. Ancient observers did not simply describe isolated anomalies. They preserved a worldview in which cosmic stability was fragile, and divine presence was intertwined with the behavior of the heavens. When the sky behaved strangely, it was not a scientific puzzle. It was a revelation. This cultural and psychological framework explains why the withdrawing sky motif persisted even when events were rare. Communities believed the heavens revealed divine intent. When the sky trembled, they trembled. When it seemed to open, they believed something beyond was emerging. But the most powerful reason the ancient words make sense today is not scientific. It is experiential. Modern humanity is witnessing phenomena that align with descriptions once considered too fantastical to take seriously. From unusual auroras observed far south of their native regions, to horizon-level distortions produced by global temperature shifts, to strange luminous events recorded by pilots and satellites, the sky is behaving in ways that echo the language of ancient seers. This does not mean that ancient prophecies are being fulfilled in a literal, deterministic sense. Nor does it imply that modern phenomena possess supernatural significance. But it does mean the ancients were accurate observers of their world. They saw events they could not explain and recorded them with a seriousness that merits respect. Their words, preserved across generations, now stand in a new light, meaningful, coherent, and unexpectedly aligned with modern understanding. As the story approaches its conclusion, the question becomes unavoidable. If the ancients saw something real, something the modern world is now seeing again, what does that imply about the meaning they attach to the vanishing sky? In every generation, people have stood beneath the sky and wondered what lies beyond it. They have measured its cycles, charted its stars, and watched its colors shift with the turning of the seasons. But there have also been moments, rare, unsettling, unforgettable, when the sky behaved in ways that defied every expectation. When ancient observers recorded these moments, they preserved more than isolated events. They preserved a message. Whether they knew it or not, they were leaving a warning for future generations. The heavens are not as fixed as they appear. The question this investigation has pursued from the beginning is simple but profound. What did the ancients really see when they described the heavens withdrawing? Were they witnessing symbolic visions meant to be interpreted spiritually? Were they poetically dramatizing political turmoil? Or were they recording something real, an atmospheric or cosmic phenomenon so unusual that they could only describe it in the language of their age? By tracing the motif of the vanishing sky across centuries, cultures, and religious traditions, the evidence points in a remarkable direction. The ancient writers were not inventing the imagery. They were responding to events that left deep impressions on their minds. And as the historical, scientific, and psychological evidence converge, the possibility emerges that their descriptions reflect a phenomenon far larger, a phenomenon that modern science is only now beginning to understand. The first and most obvious layer of interpretation involves natural events. The ancient Near East occasionally experienced atmospheric conditions capable of distorting the sky in dramatic ways. Inversion layers, dust veils, auroras, luminous arcs, and rare electrical discharges. These events, though grounded in natural processes, were interpreted through theological frameworks that saw the heavens as a boundary maintained by divine order. When that boundary wavered, even slightly, it threatened the entire conceptual structure of ancient cosmology. Yet, natural explanation alone is insufficient. The consistency of the withdrawing sky motif across centuries suggests that ancient observers preserved a memory of events that were not merely unusual. They were transformative. In each era, the imagery retains its core elements: a sky that thins, trembles, folds, or reveals another layer beyond itself. Different cultures interpreted the events according to their own beliefs, but the visual experience remained strikingly similar. This continuity raises a second question. Why did the ancients view these events as messages rather than curiosities? The answer lies in their worldview. The sky was not an inert physical structure. It was the interface between human existence and divine presence. Its stability symbolized divine faithfulness. Its disturbance signaled divine action. When the heavens withdrew, ancient societies believed they were witnessing not random chaos, but the unveiling of hidden truth. This belief shaped communal responses. rituals intensified, leaders interpreted the signs for their people, prophets recorded their visions with urgency, communities preserved these records even when they did not fully understand them. The vanishing sky became a recurring motif precisely because it touched universal human fears and hopes. The fear of cosmic instability, the hope of divine intervention, but the final layer of interpretation, the one that gives this ancient imagery its modern relevance, emerges only when scientific knowledge and historical memory intersect. In recent decades, new categories of sky phenomena have entered scientific vocabulary: sprites, elves, gigantic jets, stable auroral arcs, noctilucent clouds, and interstellar dust veils. These discoveries reveal that Earth's atmosphere is far more dynamic, complex, and visually dramatic than previously understood. Many of these events were invisible to science until modern instruments detected them. And yet, the descriptions preserved in ancient texts align with them in surprising ways. This does not prove that the prophets witnessed the same phenomena documented by satellites today, but it strongly suggests that the ancients encountered real events that science can now partially explain. Their descriptions of skies thinning, opening, or revealing deeper layers may reflect encounters with atmospheric structures that rarely occur, but leave unforgettable impressions when they do. This leads to a deeper conclusion. The ancients did not misunderstand their world. They interpreted it with remarkable sensitivity, recording events that modern readers can now recognize within scientific frameworks. Their language was symbolic because their worldview was symbolic, but the underlying experience was real. The question remains, why did they preserve these memories with such intensity? Why did the withdrawing sky motif endure across centuries, entering Jewish apocalyptic literature and early Christian thought? Why did it become a symbol not only of fear, but of revelation? The answer lies in the emotional power of the experience. To witness the sky behave in ways that defy expectation is to confront the fragility of the world's order. Ancient societies lived closer to the natural world than modern audiences do. They read the sky with the same care we reserve for political events or scientific discoveries. When the heavens trembled, it was not merely an atmospheric anomaly. It was a sign that something fundamental was shifting. This shift could be interpreted in many ways: divine warning, divine judgment, divine unveiling. But in every case, the withdrawing sky served as a threshold, a moment when the boundary between the visible and the invisible grew thin. Ancient observers believed that these moments revealed truths normally hidden. They believed the heavens were showing them something important, something that needed to be remembered. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning of the ancient warning. The vanishing sky was not a literal prediction of cosmic collapse. It was a metaphor for the moments when the world's familiar structures give way, revealing deeper realities beneath. In every age, societies experience such moments, times when the systems that define daily life seem to dissolve, exposing truths long ignored. The ancients encoded this experience in the language of cosmology. Modern readers can translate it into the language of psychology, sociology, or science, but the core insight remains the same. The sky can withdraw in many forms. It can withdraw through natural events that destabilize the familiar. It can withdraw through moral crises that force communities to confront hidden truths. It can withdraw through scientific discoveries that reveal layers of reality once unseen. In every case, the withdrawing sky signals a shift, a moment when the world as we know it becomes transparent. And this is why the ancient words make sense today. Not because the heavens are literally tearing apart, but because the world is undergoing transformations that challenge the frameworks once taken for granted. The ancient imagery resonates because humanity still stands beneath the same sky, a sky that, despite its constancy, still has the power to unsettle, reveal, and astonish. The prophets recorded their visions not merely as warnings, but as reminders. They wanted future generations to remember that stability is never absolute, that the world can change suddenly, and that those changes reveal truths we cannot afford to ignore. Their message is simple. Do not take the sky for granted. Do not assume that the structures of the world, physical or social, are unbreakable. The heavens can withdraw, and when they do, pay attention. For in that moment, something hidden becomes visible.